The Amazon sword is a common aquarium plant that I've been keeping in my tanks for the last few years. Overall, it is a plant I like, but today I want to talk through both my likes and dislikes of the plant along with my experience keeping it. Hi, it's Connor. Welcome to or back to my channel. So today I want to talk about the Amazon sword plant and specifically my experience keeping it, the basic care, and then what I like and what I dislike, and just what has worked and hasn't worked for me. Some real quick background on it. You can see I have two Amazon swords in the back there, one right here and one over here. They're pretty small. I have a decent amount of algae on them, so they're not doing the best right now. I have to clean them up, and I got them pretty small, so they're pretty much the same size as when I got them. They can get much bigger than this. They're a plant that's known to either be for the background or midground. It really depends what other plants you have and what size tank you have, but it can easily get to 15 inches and even taller than that in some situations. It's a rooted plant, and so it's a heavy root feeder, so it does well in either nutrient-rich substrate or having root tabs. And so I have it planted in little net pots there, and then I have nutrient-rich substrate within that. And then the last thing I just want to mention is it does come under multiple scientific names. I'm not going to pronounce them here. I'll put them on the screen because I know I'm going to pronounce them wrong, but there are several variations of it, and they all refer to the same plant, and they all do look pretty similar. Quick history on me keeping Amazon swords. I've kept them multiple times in different aquariums and different setups. Overall, I'd say I've been pretty successful with it. They've done pretty well for me. The first time I kept them was in the 65-gallon tank behind me, and I did have some problems with algae at first, but once I got that under control and in a good place, my Amazon swords absolutely thrived, and they got very big and just very dense. A lot of leaves grow, so it did very well overall. I also kept them in a tank with CO2, and those ones just did excellent. They just kind of, grew well, they stayed very green, and did healthy. And then I actually have some in the tank now behind me that are smaller. They're in the back right there. I do actually have different swords over here that I'm getting ready to plant. Those are red Reuben, so they're not Amazon swords necessarily, but similar care requirements. Anyway, the ones I have right now, I say they're doing mediocre, not that great, because I kind of just have, I need to get algae under control in this tank. It's not too bad, but the plants are definitely getting a decent amount on them, and every few weeks I'm having to brush it off, so I'm trying to balance everything right, but haven't quite got there yet. So anyway, I kind of wanted to do just a quick overview on care and my thoughts on that and what I've done, and then kind of go through the pros and cons of this plant and close out here with what I'd recommend for someone who's thinking about this plant who hasn't necessarily had it before. So first here is just growth and size it gets to. So the max size does vary. On average, I found that leaves get to between 12 to 14 inches, but for sure they can reach up to 20 inches, and you'll even see examples of people having ones that are as tall, the plant, as 24 inches, so they can get really massive in the right conditions. They grow pretty slow, and they just kind of grow slow and steady. When I had mine that was really thriving, it ended up, the leaves kind of got to the max length they would get to, maybe 14 inches or so. And then eventually new leaves would come out, and eventually once those all grew in, it probably took a good amount of months, 3 to 6 months for them to really grow in. And then it was just looking very massive, very thick. So it looked very cool in that regard. Now going on to the water parameters and overall requirements for it. So the temperature recommended is between 72 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's just the most common one. I have seen some sources say it can get down to as low as 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but I'd say for the optimal conditions, it looks like at least 72 is best. And in Celsius, that's 22 to 28 degrees Celsius. For pH, between 6.5 and 7.5, so right around neutral is best. And some sources do say as low as 6.0, but it seems, right around neutral is going to be the best bet for this plant. Hardness, generally I'll read between 8 and 15 degrees general hardness. That probably can vary a little bit. That's probably the least important, but that's generally probably the middle range that's best for them. Lighting, moderate to low is going to be best, and even then probably more moderate. The one thing I did learn that I actually didn't know or didn't remember from when I initially researched them is a lot of people say that a longer period of light of not that intensity is best, so like 10 to 12 hours of not the highest intensity is probably better than shorter with higher intensity. My lights actually right now only have on for 5 hours a day, and before that it was 6 hours. I probably just need to dim them some more and then maybe expand that to try to have the plants be doing better for right now. But I'm kind of just trying to get algae control, so I've been kind of leaning them down. I probably just need to actually dim them a bit, and hopefully that'll help, or turn off some of the red hue and such. As far as water flow, I really didn't see much on this, so I'd say probably just moderate's the best. I don't think it's really going to be that important. As far as substrate, you can put them in anything, but a nutrient-rich one is really what they're going to thrive in because they're root feeders. Now, if you just have them in gravel or sand, I highly recommend root tabs, and if you put a few root tabs right around the base of them where the roots really are, then they'll do just as well as if they're a nutrient substrate. As far as CO2, not needed. Pretty much with any aquarium plant, if you have CO2, they'll just do better. My experience was they did great with CO2, but I've also have been very successful without CO2. And for tank size, now they aren't a fish, so there's not like a minimum tank size where it's like unethical to keep them in that. But really, they do get pretty large, so really a 20 gallon is going to be better. So probably either 20 tall or 29 gallon is going to do better. They can get to the full size and such. You could totally keep them in a 10 gallon, but they're probably not going to reach their full size. And if they do get pretty large, they're pretty much going to take over a lot of the tank, like half the tank. And maybe you like that, but that's just something to keep in mind. They're probably better for 20 gallon and up tanks. And I'll just add, when mine were doing the best and thriving, what I kept them at was 80 degrees Fahrenheit, a pH of 7.4, and my hardness was right around 12 degrees general hardness. For planting them, it's pretty simple. You just want to dig a hole in the substrate, and you want to bury the roots well, cover the roots with the substrate, but the crown, which is just the base of where all the stems are coming out, you don't want that to be covered. You want that to be visible. So really the line of the substrate should be right at the bottom of that crown, right where the green starts, but all the roots under it. And sometimes I have found that they can be kind of hard to plant, especially if you're not planting in a fresh tank and you're already planting them while the tank is full. So one thing I kind of like to do is when you're pulling them out and they have that rock wool on them, if you keep a little bit on there, or a lot of times you can't get it all off, actually like wrapping a plant around that gently will actually help them stay down better and until the roots really get into the substrate, and then they can stick. As far as good qualities about the plant, what I personally like, one, it's low tech, so you don't need CO2. You can do a pretty basic setup, and as long as you get everything balanced, they'll do very well. Along with that, they're known to be very hardy. They can tolerate a lot. I'll say from my experience is they're very forgiving to mistakes. So if something's off in the tank, something's imbalanced, they'll show you that there's a problem. They'll get holes in their leaves, they'll turn a little brown, they'll start to crack. You'll see leaves that just aren't doing well. But the whole plant usually doesn't die off super quickly. And so as long as you get things in balance and correct things, the plant should probably be fine long term. You probably have to cut off the leaves that aren't doing well, and it might take a while to grow back. But from my experience, I've actually really almost never thrown out Amazon sores except when I'm changing aquascapes and want to get fresh ones, because they can usually bounce back if you manage to figure out what the problems you're having are and get everything balanced. And then, along with that, they're just very beginner friendly. It's pretty basic. I'd say really the only thing you need to know is try to balance things out, and then make sure they have nutrients on the roots. So you just do root tabs if you're doing a simple substrate. So very beginner friendly in that regard. Next is they're easily available. You can get them pretty much anywhere that sells plants, and that includes box or chain stores. So that's a good thing is, if you want some for an aquascape or a new tank, you can just go out to any store or order them anywhere online. And they're also pretty inexpensive. I generally find for the smaller plants, they're going to be $5 or even less. And then for larger ones, you probably spend between 10 to 15, but they're not a plant that's very expensive by any means, and they're so common. And there's so many people that sell them that you can actually probably shop around and look for good deals if you want. Another thing is they're a good centerpiece plant, especially in a low-tech tank where there's not that many options of plants you can get. They're a plant that gets pretty big, it's bright green, and just looks pretty cool. Especially if you have a smaller tank like a 20 gallon or 29 gallon, it could easily be a nice centerpiece plant that doesn't have very strict requirements. One thing I really like for it that was kind of my goal in this tank, but I got smaller ones than actually I wanted. They didn't have like any mother pots or anything. I'd actually really like some Amazon stores the size of these red Rubens back here. But they can be very great line of sight breaks. So if you have some fish in your tank that are a bit more aggressive and you want to have line of sight breaks, they're absolutely great for that, especially if you get a few or a bunch of them, you put them in a line and they can pretty much just create a wall, but at the bottom, fish can swim through. So if fish are chasing, they can just go to the other side, and absolutely great line of sight break. So it's for natural plants, one of my favorite ways to just create more line of sight breaks in your tank. And another thing I like about them is they have a lot of tank mate options. The best tank mates for them, in my opinion, are just going to be common community fish, because they're not going to damage them. They're not going to rip them out the substrate. But but they can go with a lot, and I have had very good success with them with some more aggressive fish. And by that I mean, or not necessarily aggressive, but more aggressive towards plants, more rambunctious fish is kind of what I'm going for. And the examples I have are blood parrots and goldfish. Now, I'm not going to say it's just going to instantly work with them. What I actually do is you can see in these plants over here, I usually put them in the aquarium pots like that, but actually put nutrient root substrate in there, bury the roots well, and then at the top of it around the crown, I put little rocks to help them stay even better and really support the base. And from my experience, they've done very well, not really been pulled out. You also can do what I said, if there's some rock wool on that, wrap the rock wool very gently with aquarium weight, and that'll even help them stay down even more. But I've had really good success with them with blood parrots and goldfish and not really being uprooted if I plant them well. Now, as far as bad qualities and things that aren't the greatest about, they're just to keep in mind. If you hit some of these, then maybe they're not the best plant for you. But it's really better for the larger or taller tanks. Like I said, if a 10-gallon, really kind of too small for them, unless you're looking for a plant just to take over the whole aquarium. But yeah, you really want a tank that's going to be probably 16 inches plus in height. Next thing, and this could be good or bad, but slow growth. A lot of people like their plants just to grow fast and, really see them in front of their eyes grow. And along with this, bad thing about slow plant growth, which is kind of the problem I'm having right now, is if your tank is getting algae, it'll grow on the plants that grow slower pretty easily. So that is just something to keep in mind. Next is the leaves, in my opinion, are pretty delicate. Now, I haven't really had any problems with fish messing them up, but I have noticed if I leave them near like an air stone, the leaves getting hit by the bubbles will not do very well. And as well, when you're handling the plant, it's very easy to crack and break a leaf. And it's also bad if you do get algae. Cleaning it off the leaves, you just have to be very gentle. You can definitely do it, just rub it with your finger gently, but be very careful to not crack it because it can crack very easily from my experience. Next is they do require a pretty deep substrate. I usually just put them in those aquarium pots, and then that's been plenty deep in my experience. They've done well like that. But you're really going to want over an inch, probably closer to 2 inches plus of substrate to put them in, because they do have very big roots once they get going. And lastly here, they are a plant that commonly, when they're grown, before they're sold, they're grown immersed, which means they're grown out of water. The roots are in water, but the rest of the plant's out of water. And so this is bad because when you bring them home and you plant it in your tank, over time, the leaves that are grown out of water are probably going to die off. Now, if everything's good in your tank and they have the right nutrients, they're just going to grow new leaves back, and after a good amount of months, they'll look beautiful again. But it's something to keep in mind is they might die back when you first get them and have to regrow. Now, if you're thinking of getting Amazon swords, and this is especially for someone who hasn't had them, just kind of my recommendations is really to think about the size tank you want, because they do get pretty large. As I said, these aren't Amazon swords, but you can imagine they get to about that size. So you just want to keep in mind that you're going to have a tank, probably at least 14 inches tall. I'd say 16 is even better. Really a 20 tall or a 29 gallon plus should be good. But if you have like a 10 gallon, maybe not the plant for you. There are other swords that are smaller, like an ocelot sword, I believe, for example. And that may be a better chance if you like the care requirements, but you don't have a tank that's large enough for them. Now, if you are a beginner and you haven't had much experience with plants, I think they're a great introduction to rooted plants, because their care requirements are pretty easy, just moderate light. You just kind of have to balance the tank to prevent too much algae. And really, as long as you either give them root tabs or nutrient-rich substrate, those should do fine. So great for beginners, great to learn about rooted plants without worrying about too much other stuff. But anyway, that kind of wraps up my experience keeping Amazon swords and my kind of thoughts, the pros and cons and such. I'd love to hear other people's experience keeping them and their kind of thoughts, anything I missed. And if you thought this video was helpful or you liked it, likes and subscriptions to my channel are very appreciated. But anyway, I appreciate everyone watching, and I'll catch everyone next time.